extension of your countryman, Colonel Colt. God created all men. They say Sam Colt made them equal.
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear Colt manufacturing, I think of revolvers. I think of guns that have been in every single American conflict since after the Revolutionary War. Cavalry. I think of the Confederate rebels. I think of 1911, men storming the beaches, Vietnam, M16s, M4s now, constantly. Colt with the outlaws that carried the pistols, revolvers up to the bank robbers during the Great Depression. Colt was always present. Even later on in Hollywood with iconic firearms, constantly. Colt's influence is always present. Colt's become an American household name. Let's check out the history, and we'll find out why.
So before we get into it, as always, we do not use live rounds unless we're at the range in a safe, controlled area. Always follow the 4 basics of firearm safety. And firearms always checked as well and ensure they're not loaded. Empty magazine. Clear.
Samuel Colt was born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut. His fascination with firearms began at a very young age because of his grandfather. On his mother's side, Major John Caldwell, had been an officer in the Continental Army. He had given Samuel his flintlock pistol from when he was in the military. Sad to say, both of his parents had died while he was at a very young age, and the only fond memory of his childhood was this flintlock pistol, which would also be the one that shapes him into who he was and what his legacy is. But what if I were to tell you, Colt actually got his start out earning money at different... Samuel Colt originally had a patent manufacturing company in New Jersey. At this time, he was actually making naval mines for the ocean. Ended up becoming a medical supply man, traveling salesman show. And believe it or not, the product that he was selling, laughing gas, nitrous oxide. Notable work that most people don't realize or think about is he invented rubber insulated telegraph cable. As far as making firearms, Colt did not do very well up until the Mexican-American War. The Texas Rangers needed to be armed. The Texas Rangers had put in an order for 2,000 of the Colt Walker pistols. Colt had the entire market for revolver pistols due to his patents. It did not expire until the mid-1850s. Colt had designed all of the firearms so that they could be mass-produced quickly on an assembly line. Although Colt had came up with the assembly line long before Henry Ford, he never got the credit for it. Colt Manufacturing was also the first company to allow women to work in their factories and facilities. When the Civil War had begun, Colt was actually providing firearms for both the Union and the Confederate forces. Colt Manufacturing was turning the highest amount of profit they have in their existence, and Samuel Colt became one of the most wealthiest men in America at that time. Colt had begun buying other firearm manufacturers' patents. Due to more competition, Colt had to up their game and come up with something original. What client or customer could Colt possibly have that's always going to be in heavy demand of his firearms? Military contracts. Thus, the beginning of Uncle Sam Colt.
In 1859, Colt considered building an armory in the South. As late as 1861, he had sold 2,000 revolvers to Confederate agent John Forsyth. Although the trade with the South had not been restricted at the time, newspapers labeled him as a Southern sympathizer and traitor to the Union. To combat these allegations, Colt kept only his factory in Connecticut. He joined the Union and he received his commission as a lieutenant colonel. He was commissioned to command the 1st Regiment, which would have Colt's revolving rifles, state-of-the-art weapons manufactured from his company. However, his unit was never sent to the battlefield as Colt was discharged June 20th, 1861. Aside from the American Civil War kicking off, the Confederates in the South and the Union forces fighting from the North, Colt was also an advertising genius. Although Colt's firearms did not always fare well in standardized military testing, he preferred written testimonials from individual soldiers who had actually used his weapons on the battlefield. He would take these written testimonials to the newspaper printing companies and pay them to advertise or place these in their columns. Colt would give beautifully decorated pistols to politicians, aristocrats, high society, royalty in Europe. He was always pushing his product, and with the title of lieutenant colonel, it gave him more clout. Colt always used Made in America or American Made as one of the primary ways for him to advertise. After Samuel Colt was discharged on June 20th of 1861, it wasn't too many months that went by before finally his life would be taken by gout-related complications on January 10th of 1862. At the time of his death, Colt's estate was worth approximately $15 million, which today's terms is equivalent to about $248 million. And although Samuel Colt had passed away, his legacy lived on, and military contracts kept coming. Colt manufacturing would produce some of the greatest weapons of our time.